Fast forward.
Hello, everyone. It's a bit blinding here with all the lights, but let's put up with it for the time being, anyhow. I was going to tell you lots of jokes and so on, but I woke up this morning and thought, this is getting too serious for too many jokes, so I'm going to launch straight into what really concerns me. And that is when I set up TEDxLeicester some time ago, it was to help people to make life better for themselves. It's now distressing to find out that I've got to think of helping people to avoid a disaster that seems to be looming. We are on track to ruin life on Earth. I know that seems extreme, but that's certainly one of the possible outcomes. We know this, our children know it, and they urge us to do something about it. Many factors are going to determine whether we succeed or not. We have the technical capability. We know what to do. We have the scientific know-how. But will we come together in order to make use of it properly? Will we do that? Looking back to when I was 12 and the Second World War ended, we really were concerned and decided to try and do something. And we put together the United Nations with a proclamation that I still find inspiring and moving. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determine to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. We've not entirely succeeded. We've avoided a world war. We've avoided a nuclear war. But there are still far too many inhumanities around and far too many small warfares. The UN is still functioning and is working extremely hard, and one must be impressed by what it's doing. Its reports, and there'll be another one in about 3 weeks, I think it is, in New York, telling us what the situation is, trying to get us together, and I hope they succeed. And business is increasingly getting concerned about the situation for monetary reasons and for ethical reasons. So, anything else? Scientists are beginning to speak frankly and not be muffled by politicians. But beyond all this, we need something more. We need to do more than survive if we're going to continue confidently into the future. We must now begin to put together an idea of humanity that embraces everyone, so that we can look across the world and say, that is someone I care for. And perhaps we need a new declaration from the United Nations. In fact, possibly a new United Nations. With the declaration, we, the peoples of the earth, all of us. And what are we going to do? Education is clearly going to be an important part of correcting the situation, especially into the distant future. We are now a species that can, for the first time in life, begin to modify itself. Begin to succeed or fail. There's an awful idea from the physicist Fermi that the reason that we don't see any aliens around is simply that whenever a civilization gets roughly to the level that we are, it gets to the level where it can destroy itself. And it does. We must certainly make sure that we don't do that. But we must also make a civilization that is good for everyone that cares for everyone. So what should we do? We should certainly search the religions of the world to find how they have handled the problem of bringing people together. But we must add now our knowledge that we have acquired over centuries of what we are. We must be able to tell our young people how we came here and how we succeeded in dealing with droughts and famines and all the rest of things that the environment has thrown on them, while we are avoiding making the environment bad ourselves. We must tell our children the full story of humanity so that they can work on living well together. Come to education in this country, which is what I'm obviously most familiar with. Last year, there was a report from a committee, a very able and concerned committee, that had sat for 2 years to work out what to do with religious education in this country. And of course, that is a compulsory subject. Schools have got to give something in that area. It was very worried. And it came up with a recommendation. But before the recommendations, it announced that we are convinced that religious education needs rejuvenating if it is not to wither on the vine. Now, that's a terrible conclusion in 2 years by 15 able people. Its recommendations began, we should change the title from religious education to religion and world views. We should create a course with this title to be taught in all state-funded schools, including religious schools. That's a remarkable move forward. Government has not taken much notice of it, but I think it must now. You can see the direction of movement. We must broaden the view of what we're doing, what we're bringing up our children to know, and how to feel about the world, how to regard others as valuable and treat them decently, care for them. But when we look at the 100-page report, we find the mention of evolution only once, and that with regard to a change in text within a document. It's not good enough at all. That is the accepted account by all scientists of how we've got where we are, how we achieve what we've got, the process by which we have moved from being inarticulate to being able to converse and to discuss things, the process by which we have developed our groups in larger and larger numbers so that we can make use of our differences instead of fighting over them. And it's quite unacceptable on educational grounds that we should deprive our children of this information. And it's particularly serious when we know that over half of the adults in the country do not regard themselves as having a religion, when 70% of our young people do not regard themselves as having a religion. We must produce an education where they can regard religions not as being thrust upon them, but as being sources of information about how we have tackled these problems in the past. and also see them within the context of what we now know about human beings in all aspects. What makes us, what still perplexes us, and what we've still got to work on to make sure that we make a better job than we have occasionally done in the past. We need a course that brings us together. Again, humanity and living is one name that I have proposed on several occasions. We need a course with a purpose that is simple, obvious, and which we can all agree to and get supported by government and other sources. A course that shares our wonderful story with our children and fits them to take it further. Is there any hope for that? Well, I think there may be. The report from the committee that I mentioned earlier is clearly looking in that direction, but is trammeled by problems of all sorts, cultural and political. We've got to break through that. So, if we look around Leicester, does that give us any hope? Well, we are the most diverse city, or certainly one of the most diverse cities in the country, possibly in the world. We know how to live well together, reasonably well. And looking around, if you fall down in the street in Leicester, look at who helps you to get up again. What will be their religion? Does it matter? But it may be one of many. And what about the person who is your counselor, or your postman, or your bus driver, and your doctor? We are a city that is helping its members. There are people are helping its members as human beings, and that is the aim that I would look to for the future, to be spread through the world. I have moved quite considerably during 86 years, from a choir boy at 8 to an atheist grammar school boy at 13. And now one of my greatest pleasures is talking to young students in school with a group of people who come from many different religions. We tell them about our religion. I tell them about evolution and some other things. We get on well with students. But the one thing that we want to tell them more than anything else is look at how different we are, but look at the fact that we are friends, that we get on one another. Get on with one another, not get on one another. We may do that on occasion. But I was thinking ahead to what I heard just last week in a meeting about this organization, which incidentally is organized by the Church of England. But there I am as an atheist still with the Church of England. But what I was told was that the thing that surprises the school children is that we actually sit down for lunch together and we seem to be joking and exchanging all sorts of ideas. It is sad that the idea that's in the minds of our young people is that if you're a different religion, or if you're two people from different religions, you must be antagonistic to one another. We must certainly correct that, and on the whole, living in Leicester helps us to correct that. So, to come back to whether we can do anything, I think we can. If we get together in Leicester, and to an extent we are doing, as I've just indicated, we can make life enjoyable for everyone. And that must be the aim, not just an educational, academic education, but an education that teaches you, that enables you, that trains you, if you like, to enjoy life, that shows you the way human beings should live with one another. Now, Leicester has plenty of places of worship of all kinds for us to get together and find out what each of these wants to contribute to humanity. And it also has the oldest secular society in the country. Leicester Secular Hall was built in 1881 to house the secular society which was opened in 1851, great exhibition, another occasion. And what do we find on the facade of Leicester Secular Society? Well, we find Tom Paine, who you would expect, and Voltaire, and Socrates, but also Jesus. That's caused some debate. But secularism is not against religion. In fact, during the 19th century, it was notable in helping non-Anglican religions to be able to be themselves, to avoid their children having to learn the catechism of the Church of England, for example. And particularly in politics, to make it possible for people who were not of the right religion to sit in Parliament. That was in the late 1900s. And indeed, in my case, I couldn't have gone to Cambridge because I was an atheist in 1880. So it's a matter of interpreting what it is to be a good life, that we have a good life that we're dealing with. So I could go on praising Leicester. I'm sure there are things that one can criticize, but there we are. I will just add one topic. I went on a coach trip to Oxford with Hindus, singing. It was a glorious visit, a very enjoyable visit. But what it reminded me of was going on the works outings from the factory that my parents worked in, which had the same sort of atmosphere. Of course, we were going to Blackpool then. I was invited to set up a school with entry by lots to avoid any selection by a woman who looked at me through the slit of a black face covering. Now, isn't that something that people from outside would not have thought possible? And it's realizing these wonderful possibilities in the city that I'm going to spend whatever I've got in life trying to encourage, and nationally. I've spent so many years on national organizations, on the boards of national organizations, but this is the main aim now. Let us please get humanity together. Let us stop spending so immense amounts of money and time and effort in learning, in finding out how to kill one another better. And let's turn it to how we can help one another live a good life together. So thank you.
Fast forward.